Welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Across the board from me, Tim Dennis. Tonight we're talking about strangeness in the rock and roll world. I know that's hard to believe, Tim. Strangeness in rock and roll.
Never. Between the drugs, the groupies, and satanic worship.
There's also myths, legends, and curses, and that's what we're talking about tonight with author R. Gary Patterson. Take a Walk on the Dark Side is his other book that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. The Walrus Was Paul. An interesting read. That was what we spent our first hour talking about. Again, just kind of a weird conspiracy theory deal. It's kind of out of the realm of our normal ghosts and ghoulies, but it's okay to stretch out this way a little bit, talk some more about the weird urban legends and strangeness, I think. Mm-hmm. So hopefully you guys are enjoying it as much as we are learning more. Hey, I want to make a couple of quick mentions. Our phone lines are open right now. We have some passes to give away for next weekend. If you're in Louisville, Kentucky, or in the Kentucky area and want to make the trek, we have a free pass. You can call in. You get one free pass per household to get you into the Mid-South Paranormal Conference. When you call in, Tim or our lovely assistant will take your name, your email address, and your phone number, and we'll pass that on to the event planners. That's taking place next weekend in Louisville, Kentucky. It's a Mid-South Paranormal Conference. Patrick Burns from Haunting Evidence will be there. I'll be out there. We also have some other fantastic speakers like Bill Bean, Keith Age from TV's Spooked, and Children of the Grave will be there. A lot of cool paranormal stuff going on, so check it out. Again, give us a call if you're interested in getting a free pass to go to the Mid-South Paranormal Conference. And as the show progresses, if you have questions for our guest, our Gary Patterson, feel free to give us a call at that number. We're going to go back and speak to our guest now. And I want to thank you. The first hour was interesting. Like I said, I really love the whole mythology of the Paul McCartney death. And I wanted to mention with the whole backmasking thing, Mr. Patterson, one of the things I always thought was really interesting, too, was, and I'm sure you probably already know this, but our listeners may not, when the Double Fantasy album came out, right, which was just prior to John Lennon's assassination. Are you aware of the backmasking that took place on that album? Actually, I don't even think it was backmasking, right? It's Yoko speaking in between a few of the songs. Are you familiar with this story as well?
We killed John Lennon?
Yes, and I think she said, I shot John Lennon in one part, right?
Oh, I think it's We Killed John Lennon, which was a part. I think that, when I talk about backward masking.
Now, that was that backward masking where it's the tape played back, or was that just her between the tracks mumbling?
It's more like a phonetic reversal.
Okay.
And those are the ones where the voices sort of spin a little bit and they're not very clear. I guess the best one to describe that with would be Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin on the third verse. That's a classic example of what would be referred to as a phonetic reversal, which means that you have to actually say the line. Like in this case, We Killed John Lennon, then you would play it backwards, and then you would have to construct some phononyms that would say that when it's reversed. In other words, with Zeppelin, if you do the line, if there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now. Now, I've never understood what a bustle in a hedgerow is, but, when it's supposedly played backwards, it's supposed to give this great dark message, and I think that's what it is. So maybe your listeners probably are familiar with the Led Zeppelin backmask.
All right, good deal. Yeah, now, something else I wanted to talk about, too, is one of the main clues on the album cover of Abbey Road is a little Volkswagen Beetle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And its license plate is 28 if, which supposedly means that had he survived, at that time he would have been 28 years old, correct?
Right, except he was only 27. And
which ties us into this new book.
Doesn't it?
Right. See how I did that? It's almost like I'm a professional.
You're good.
Yeah.
And, of course, you couldn't, if you had that reference, the people who were caught and they were saying, well, he really wasn't 28, they would say, yes, but he was in his 28th year of life. And in Far Eastern religions, they include the time you're in your mother's womb as your birthday. So everybody made things fit. And I enjoyed, a lot of the great clues, the ones that make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. I never will forget when I first heard them or I first saw them. And it's just great that, a whole new generation or people not familiar with it can re-experience it, because I guarantee you won't listen to Beatles songs the same way again.
That's right. You go back through. So now let's talk about the 27 Club here. And it is interesting that here you've come up with this kind of mythos yourself with the 27 Club, and this actually kind of fits for Paul McCartney as well, if he truly did die during that time.
Well, when I was researching my second book, which was Hellhounds on Their Trail, and I did it with a small publisher, and, sometimes if you're with a small publisher, when you put a book out, it becomes popular. They can't keep up with the demand for it. So I had some problems getting the book into the distribution in numbers. So I bought the rights to the book back, which is, kind of unusual. And then I sold them to my publisher at Simon & Schuster. I put the book out again the way I originally wanted done, as, Take a Walk on the Dark Side, and expanded. I mean, I think it's much more superior book. But what I did is, not even thinking about it, I made Hellhounds on Their Trail into a cult classic where people were spending up to $200 a copy trying to get the book, from book dealers, and I thought that was bad. So if you have a chance, get the Take a Walk on the Dark Side for anywhere between $14 and $15. It's much better copy with photos and everything. But just amazing how that happened. But one of the things I researched was I was doing the whole thing based on Robert Johnson. And, of course, your listeners may know that Robert Johnson was the great blues player who had the rumor that he had sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads. And I noticed he died at 27. And then it sort of struck me as being odd that Brian Jones died at 27, and Janis Joplin died at 27, and Jimi Hendrix died at 27, and Jim Morrison died at 27. Kurt Cobain died at 27. I could go through a list of these. And so I thought, it's kind of odd that some of the greatest rock icons of our time died at the same age as Robert Johnson, who Eric Clapton said was the founding father of the rock and roll sound with his technique on the guitar. So that sort of set me up into what I called the Curse of 27, or the Club, or the 27 Club, because I remember Kurt Cobain's mother saying, "Now he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club." And I thought, wow, the club, what a great title for a chapter. And that's what I did. And, I could have said, yeah, isn't it tragic how many rock stars died before they were 30, okay, which would be a great list. Right. And, of course, the lifestyle plays a lot into that. But what I did, I was very particular. You had to be 27. It didn't include Graham Parsons, who was 26 and just a few months short of being 27, or Otis Redding, or some of the others who just passed it. You had to be 27 at the time. And there's over 40 rock stars who died at the age of 27. And just last week, I got an email, and if your listeners would like to write me, get me at www.rgarypatterson.com, and if you have anything you'd like to ask me, I'll be glad to send you an email. But I got an email from a fellow who's getting his PhD in statistics, and he said, "I just want you to know that I did a database of all rock stars' deaths, and 2-to-1 rock stars at the age of 27. That was the most frequent death from Buddy Holly all the way up. And they didn't even go back to the blues. So, I guess there's something odd. Now, what you may want to know, why 27?
Yeah, why 27?
And, one of the things you think about is numerology. And 2 plus 7 is 9. And 9 is the only single digit multiplied by another single digit that will always equal 9. 3 nines are 27, 2 plus 7 is 9. 9 times 9 is 81, 8 plus 1 is 9. And no other number will do that. So 9 is considered to be the highest spiritual power. So if you're Jimi Hendrix or Jim Morrison at the Doors, when they died at 27, they were at their peak as far as their artistic ability. And also, I think in astrology they say that you go through the first cycle of life is 27 years. And they go through this, and, it's kind of amazing that it fits in. Or even numerologists will go with 2 and 7. Like I think a 2 is a person who seeks love and affection, and 7 is a person who maybe lives a lifestyle which may not be too exactly conducive to a long life. I mean, I know rock and roll stars, they get everything they need at an early age. Of course, they travel rather recklessly trying to get from show to show. There's the drugs and a number of other things, but still, it's probably a great hazard. I remember reading an article with John Mayer, and they asked him, they said, well, what do you consider one of your greatest accomplishments? And he said, well, I'm past 27. And I thought, wow, So obviously it's taken on a major impact now than when I first brought it out with Hellhounds on Their Trail and Take a Walk on the Dark Side. But I think if I was a rock star and I hit 27, I think I'd stay home. I think I wouldn't fly in small planes, and I definitely would not play my electric guitar in a bathtub.
Well, yeah, I don't know any musician in the world that should be taking little planes anywhere, because that just wrought with peril. Tim's putting on his headphones. He's ready to chime in.
Yeah.
Britney Spears. No.
Yeah.
Britney Spears. Are you trying to book a flight for Britney and Christina? So with this club, now you said that there's over 40. Again, give us a couple more of the names besides Kurt Cobain and Janis Joplin.
Okay, well, Robert Johnson was, a great blues legend who died at 27. Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, mysterious death, died at 27. Jimi Hendrix died at 27. When Janis Joplin heard that Hendrix died, she said, well, I'm sure glad I didn't die today. He'd get all the press. She died 2 weeks later.
Wow.
And then the next year, well, actually several months, Jim Morrison was at his trial in Miami, and he had heard that both Joplin and Hendrix had died, and he turned to the friends at his table and he said, well, you're drinking with number 3. And he was dead in July of 1971. Pigpen from the Grateful Dead died at 27. Blind Al Wilson from Canned Heat died at 27. Pete Ham from Badfinger died at 27. Chris Bell from Big Star died at 27. Kurt Cobain died at 27. Kristen Pfaff from Hole died at 27. Jason Thirst from Pennywise died at 27. Brad Newell from Sublime died at 27.
Wow.
And the list goes on and on and on. I mean, what I normally do is I usually talk about some of the larger names that most people know, and just what would be the odds that these artists died at that one age, not under 30, but at the age of 27. It's pretty fascinating to find out how many actually passed away at that time.
Do you think with the younger generation that they know about the 27 Club now, and maybe some of them that are kind of hell-bent on self-destruction anyways, maybe are adding or wanting to add to that myth or go for the mythological number if they think their number is going to be up anyways?
I hate to say this, but I think there's some truth to that. I know that, it's kind of nice in a way that you contribute something, to folklore with the 27 thing. But I've noticed now there's a group called the 27s, and it seems like that's something in there. I think that, Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton both never thought they would live to see 30. They told friends they never thought they'd be 30. Ronnie Van Zant and Leonard Skinner had told his family that, he would never see 30, and he was right. He died before 30 in a plane crash. But, just the idea that rock and roll is such a compelling art that you die young. It's kind of like Alexander the Great in Greek mythology. According to the story, he said that Zeus Ammon appeared in front of him and gave him two choices. He could have the long life but never know fame, or he could take the short life and know glory, and he chose the short life. And the one thing about it, these rock stars who died 27, I mean, they're still the most compelling artists that everybody says, well, what could they have done if they'd only lived a little longer? But they're still frozen in time at that age where their music was at their best. So sadly, I'd say there are probably a lot of young rock stars who would say, that's probably the way to go out. Because what is it? Better to burn out than fade away, And I think that's it.
Well, with that, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show with our guest, R. Gary Patterson. Check out his website again at rgarypatterson, PATTERSON.com. We'll be back with more, and we'll take your phone calls. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. You're listening to Darkness Radio. We're here with you every Saturday and Sunday night. Tomorrow night, you're going to want to join us. We've got an interesting show, Tim. We're going to be talking to these cats out of California. They've been featured on sightings and a bunch of different paranormal forums. They're photographs that they take with Polaroid film, and that they've actually had, I guess, people from Polaroid back them up on this, and they break open a brand new deal. They start snapping pictures, and messages are scrawled across these Polaroid films. So we're going to be talking to them tomorrow, finding out about this. Our friend Bill Murphy, the Tech Talk guy, is going to be there to introduce us, and he'll give us some of the background and history on this amazing story, but we'll be back into the world of ghosts and strange paranormal phenomena tomorrow. Tonight, though, we're talking about Take a Walk on the Dark Side, rock and roll's myths, legends, and curses with author R. Gary Patterson. And before we went to the break, we were talking about the Strange 27 Club, where it seems that as soon as somebody of musical, I guess, angst hits that age of 27, they've been passing away at crazy amounts of low or high numbers at a crazy low age. I got to guess that as you're doing this research, when you started doing this, did you realize how many people had passed away at the age of 27?
was really interested in the deaths of Brian Jones, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix because they were all conspiracy theories behind it. I thought, well, I'll check this out. And then after I did the chapter on Johnson, I noticed he died at 27, and then 27, and then 27, and then 27. I remember Kurt Cobain, 27. I thought, well, maybe I should just research this and see how many rock stars died at the age of 27. And then I was just stunned because I couldn't find another age. And then when I got the email where someone had actually taken the time to actually do the statistical breakdown of it, it was even more. I mean, over 40. And, this list starts at 17. Rock stars who died at the age of 17, which actually was Richie Valens in the plane crash with Buddy Holly. But, I mean, it's just really amazing. So, I don't know if it's a curse or just a run of bad luck, but I guarantee you that rock stars today, when they hit 27, I think they're pretty well familiar with what happens at that age.
Let's talk about some of the other strange facts that you've collected in the book. Now, first of all, talk to me about the Jimmy Page Zeppelin curse. This is something I'm not familiar with.
Well, Jimmy Page always was, he always had a fascination with the occult, and especially Aleister Crowley. He had a bookstore called the Equinox in London in which he would sell Crowley memorabilia, and he collected a great deal of Crowley memorabilia. I mean, he had annotated books, he had the robes, he had ceremonial daggers, and then one day, Crowley's home, Boleskine House, came up on the market. Now, the house had a dark history, and this is a great radio show to talk about this, because Boleskine House was built in the medieval period on the spot where a medieval church was burned to the ground with its entire congregation trapped inside. Later, a man was beheaded in the house, and guests claimed that they hear the head roll down the stairs at night. So Jimmy Page was fascinated. And the house had even a larger dark history. The people who had moved in, a number of them had been driven into madness, into suicide. There were murders committed in the house. One man tried to kill his family. They locked themselves in a closet to escape him. Another man took a meat cleaver, cut his hand off as he was rotting I don't think he found that on the grocery list he was making, but cut his hand off with a meat cleaver. Aleister Crowley's wife was driven into madness. His little girl died as he lived in the house. The story goes that there were certain rooms that were so dark with his summoning of elemental spirits that artificial light would not even light it up. And when Kenneth Anger, the film director who was involved with Jimmy Page doing the film score for Lucifer Rising, he stayed in the house, and he claimed that a huge painting that must have weighed a couple of 100 pounds actually floated off the wall and sat quietly on the floor. The other rumor was that Jimmy Page never spent the night in the house. His groundskeeper did, and he was, I was doing a series with VH1, it was called VH1 Confidential, and we did an interview with him, and he was talking about trying to sleep and hearing this scratching sound on his door, and then a knocking that reverberated all through it, and he said, frankly, I was terrified. Well, that would be pretty simple there, to say that, but if you see the movie, the song remains the same. When Jimmy Page is climbing up the mountain to the old man of the tarot cards, the hermit, you can see Boleskine House in the background. But after that film was made, a number of terrible things happened. Now, some people believe that Kenneth Anger had publicly placed a curse on Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin because Page hadn't produced enough music for his film score. But Jimmy Page laughed that off. But what happened was that a number of tours were broken. It was just terrible bad luck. John Paul Jones had broken his little finger, I think, on his left hand, so they had to cancel the tour. John Bonham had a number of car accidents that kept a tour from happening. The strangest was with Robert Plant. He and his wife, Maureen, were injured on vacation in a terrible car accident, and she almost died. And I think it was when they were making the Presence album that Robert Plant had to do the album sitting in a wheelchair. And eventually in 1977, they went on tour again, and while they were in New Orleans, word came that Robert Plant's son Carrick had died of a very simple disorder. It was like a stomach virus and complications that went in. So as soon as all this bad luck happened, and also the death of Bonham in the 80s, the British newspapers really took it out on Jimmy Page, claiming it was his interest in the occult that brought the Zeppelin curse and all these terrible things that happened. And, of course, there were rumors that Plant wouldn't play with Page because of that it cost too much. And then you go back to the beginning. I mean, here was a group, two studio guys, Jimmy Page was probably the most brilliant sessions guitar player in British rock. I mean, he's the guy playing guitar on Sunshine Superman by Donovan. He's
really?
He plays guitar on Hurdy Gurdy Man. He plays Baby Please Don't Go for Van Morrison and Dim. I mean, brilliant guitar parts, but nobody knew who he was. And then John Paul Jones was an arranger, producer, sessions player, so he plays bass. And then you get this 18-year-old kid, Robert Plant, and 18-year-old drummer John Bonham, who no one had heard of. And these guys knocked the Beatles off the charts. You know, nobody had heard of them. It wasn't the Stones. So the rumor went around that they had signed a pact, just like Robert Johnson, and that one of the members hadn't signed, but the other three did. And it was whispered about it. The road crew whispered about it. And they knew that Page was interested in Crowley memorabilia. And they also know that when Led Zeppelin 4, the So-So album with the four cymbals, was recorded at Headley Grange. Headley Grange was an old Victorian house that used to be a workhouse. And, of course, workhouses in the Victorian period was where the working poor were forced to go in and work for their sustenance. And it was a house that was filled with misery and suffering. And when Page went into the house, he claimed that he saw apparitions at the top of the stairs, that his sheets were always wet. And that was where Stairway to Heaven was recorded with some of the others. So it was actually, as Page referred to it, as being a hot spot, I guess you would say, as far as hauntings go. So that album was recorded there, which is probably their greatest album, Led Zeppelin 4. So The Curse, the Boleskine House story, I mean, Boleskine House for you guys, I mean, you'd love this because this is probably the greatest haunted house in rock and roll history is Boleskine. And
well, let's get real quick. My co-host Tim has a question. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, just to add to the whole Jimmy Page legend of him being obsessed with things dark, didn't he supposedly write a lot of the music by doing some sort of form of automatic writing? Have you heard that? Either he or Page did lyrics or music by doing automatic writing?
Well, Plant, I'd heard, had done this. You know, automatic writing was used. And, of course, you know, Plant had this great love of Tolkien. And when they did Stairway to Heaven, and it has the famous backward track on the third verse that supposedly if you play it backwards, you hear a voice that says, "Here's to my sweet Satan." And then the next line, very clearly to me, says, "The one will be the sad one who makes me sad, whose power is in Satan." And, you know, Crowley had a book called Theory of Practice, or what is it, Theory of Practicing Magic. And in the book, it says, Crowley says, you know, the magician must learn to think backwards, to walk backwards, to listen to his phonograph records backwards. So you do have a line that goes in there with that. Of course, you know, Plant says that the words just came to him, but they didn't try to do anything. It would be something subliminal. But, you know, I have heard something about that the words just came, which would be like automatic writing, which you're talking about.
Well, I don't want to, before we go to break, I just thought I'd throw this out there, too. If you listen to Mandy by Barry Manilow backwards, he clearly says, listen to Darkness Radio Saturday and Sunday nights. I didn't know if you knew about that, Gary.
No, I didn't, but I'll put it in my next book. How's that?
Right. And Copacabana, play it backwards, and Barry Manilow's heard saying, I'm totally rubbing my nipples right now.
Yeah.
It's a strange story. We're going to be back with more strange stories. You're listening to Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. Welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. This evening, we're spending a night in rock and roll legend, myth, and mysterious ways. We're talking to author R. Gary Patterson, who has written a book called Take a Walk on the Dark Side, Rock and Roll's Myths, Legends, and Curses. And I've got a call on the line here with us, so if you don't mind, we'll take a quick question from the audience. Is that all right, Gary? All right, and Robert, we have you on the line. You have a question?
Hey, Dave, how are you?
Doing good, buddy. Thanks a lot for calling in tonight. What was your question for our author friend here?
Well, besides the whole Robert Johnson Legend of the Crossroads deal, do you think there could have been another situation that could have possibly triggered all of these myths and rumors in the music world?
Okay, you're talking about the Crossroads being the beginning of it?
Crossroads thing, devil at the crossroads kind of deal. Do you think there could have been like something else that might have started the rumors? Or
I think that's a good question. I think that what we have to look at is where rock and roll came from, which is the very rural South. And I think you'd have to remember that a lot of blues artists played the juke joints on Friday and Saturday night and then went to church on Sundays trying to ask forgiveness for what they did on Friday and Saturday night.
Right.
So they were sort of torn between what was good and what was evil, because in those days, and basically, I guess we still say this in the South, but, you know, when you go to churches a lot, and probably the more conservative churches say there's only one type of music. You either serve God or you serve the devil. And I know that Little Richard mentioned that when he went into the ministry. So you take that idea and you throw in sort of the belief system. Now, when you take a look at the Crossroads thing, before you do anything about music, if you do anything with Robert Johnson, Crossroads were always considered to be places where people who were executed as criminals were buried because they wouldn't be buried in hallowed ground. And the story goes that witches met at Crossroads. So if you've read the story Young Goodman Brown, written by Nathaniel Hawthorne, 19th century, Young Goodman Brown meets the devil at the Crossroads. This is many years before Robert Johnson. And in voodoo religions and African religions, there's a god who guards the crossroads between the living and dead, and his name is Legba. So the story goes that for black Africans, the story of the blues, the story of fighting for your mortal soul on Sunday for what you did on Friday and Saturday night, and the legend that a blues player could wait at that crossroads, a black man would appear, a big black man, and you would not look at him because you'd be terrified, but you'd hand your guitar over your shoulder, and you'd listen as he tuned it to a special tuning, and when he handed it back and you accepted it, you'd made your deal. And the deal would be that you'd be given the power to play the blues. You'd be given the adoring women who would follow you around, and you'd be a legend. But you died at a very terribly early age. And when Johnson played, you know, he had a cataract in one of his eyes, and when the light hit it, it would glow, and people said that's the evil eye. And when he played certain passages on his guitar, he'd turn his back, and everyone thought he had something to hide, this mysterious tuning that the devil had placed on his guitar, but actually he didn't want anybody to steal his licks. And then when he drank from the open whiskey bottle that was laced with strychnine, and it took him 3 days to die, and he was on his hands and knees howling like a dog at 27, the idea of making pacts or crossing into supernatural soliciting or whatever it was became pretty famous. And to be factual, Robert Johnson at no time claimed that he sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads. And if you remember the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Right.
Pick Up the Blues Player. His name is Tommy Johnson. And what I really like about that movie, it's very accurate because Tommy Johnson was the guy who claimed to have sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads.
You know, but which one of us has not spent a night huddled up over the toilet after way too much drinking, making a pact with whoever's willing to listen to get us through?
Whoever will listen.
That's right.
Believe me, that's it, yeah.
I will never drink again.
Yeah.
Just get me through this.
Was it Tommy Johnson or Robert Johnson who played the scale? It wasn't it Robert Johnson with Crossroads played the scale so good that people thought that there was only one way he could play these physically, is that he either had to have broken fingers or he had to have made a pact with somebody.
Well, he had a very unique playing style, and he claimed that he'd learned to play the guitar in graveyards at night. And one of the things was that he wasn't a very good guitar player when he was younger, and the old blues guys used to dodge him. So he went looking for his real father, and I think he was gone maybe 6 months. And when he came back, he was the most incredible guitarist on the Mississippi Delta. And when they heard him play, Son House said, you know, he sold his soul to play like that. And that's what started the whole thing with his death and the mystique. But I will tell you that when you listen to that story and you listen to Robert Johnson sing, his voice sounds almost unworldly when you listen to it. And I know that it pulled in Eric Clapton, it pulled in Jimmy Page, and it pulled in Keith Richards. So your great British guitarists were very well aware of Robert Johnson.
Well, one of those kids definitely had to have sold his soul to somebody, because I don't know how Keith Richards is still walking this mortal plane.
Well, I mean, Keith Richards is probably the poster child, you know, for drug abuse, I guess you would say. You know, this is what you'll look like if you survive. But, you know, one of the things about the Crossroads, it was at Clarksville, Mississippi, where Highway 49 crosses Highway 61. And when Robert Plant and Jimmy Page did their last solo album together, the album was called Walking into Clarksville. So it's kind of interesting about that Crossroads.
That's how the Monkees got so famous. They took the last train to Clarksville. What do you think, Tim?
That was Clarksville.
Yeah,
they were
damn,
lazy
so
if they
close.
took a train.
Yeah. We have another
Clarksville, they may have lasted longer and could have learned to write their own song.
Ouch. Hey, we've got Mike from Bloomington is on the line with us. Mike, you have a question about Jimi Hendrix?
Yes, it's interesting you talk about Robert Johnson. There seems to be kind of a parallel And I heard that Robert Johnson, at some point in time, really wasn't as talented as when he started out. And then apparently he was granted some special powers. But with Jimi Hendrix, is there any connection? Because I can't think of any other pop music icon, if you will, that still has such a profound impact on electric guitar playing. And we're talking about, I mean, a guy playing Purple Haze, nothing against the Beatles, but they're singing I Want to Hold Your Hand, and I would like to know if there's any connection with the occult or the supernatural with Jimi Hendrix. I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, it's a good question. When Jimi Hendrix was recording Voodoo Child, I think it was one of the guys who was in Traffic, I forgot his name, Reebok or whatever his name, he played the percussion parts. When he heard the drum parts, he was telling Jimi Hendrix that the drum parts was actually a voodoo section on drums that was summoning gods. So that was kind of, I guess we could consider that to be supernatural as far as the sound that Hendrix had with his guitar. I mean, and he's right. I mean, no one had ever played the guitar like Jimi Hendrix, and using the feedback and the sound structure he had and the effects that he used. And you know, he died way too early and sort of left it there. And of course, you know, it's like Rocky Marciano. You know, when you die on top, everybody says, yeah, but what could they have ever beaten Rocky Marciano? Could there ever be a guitarist better than Hendrix? And you know, at Hendrix's death, he was just really depressed, and there were a lot of things going wrong, and especially he's trying to get rid of his manager. And you know, there's a lot of stories about he was kidnapped a few days before his death, and they had released him from the label, and he had drugs planted on him, and it was to show that they could reach him. And then the strange event of his death, when he had taken the overdose, and Monica Daneman, his girlfriend, calls Eric Burden before she calls the ambulance to save him. I mean, so many strange things with it, but, you know, that's the role of pop legends. And I know that Jimi Hendrix was very well devoted to Robert Johnson and the blues, too. And if you listen to him, you know, play Howlin' Wolf and some of the others, he was a master blues player, so he was very well familiar with the story.
We have to take our break here. I'm going to throw a little grenade at you, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about it, and then we try to get in as much as we can in the last segment. When we come back, I want to know a little bit more what your thoughts are on Jim Morrison and the fact that did he fake his death? There's so much evidence that's pointed to that, and people like Ray Manzarek have actually come out at points saying that, yeah, Jim is alive, living in France. You know, just a strange little deal. I'd like your take on that. We'll be back with more, and you're listening to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show with our guest, author R. Gary Patterson of the book Take a Walk on the Dark Side, Rock and Roll's Myths, Legends, and Curses. We'll be back with more right here on the home of Paranormal Talk Radio. Welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Our foray into the weird and unusual has taken us to the dark side of rock and roll with its myths, legends, and curses. Our guest is R. Gary Patterson. You can check out his website at rgarypatterson, PATTERSON.com. And you will take your emails and questions there as well after the show. And remember to order both books that we've talked about tonight. The Walrus Was Paul and Take a Walk on the Dark Side. You can get both of those links by going to darknessradio.com. Go into the upcoming shows segment. You'll see the books there. You can click them. Also, just check them out on Amazon.com. Let's go. Now, before we went to break, I threw into you about the Jim Morrison thing. You know, I thought it was interesting that Oliver Stone, who's huge into conspiracy, ended the movie The Doors with, "It is said on this day Jim Morrison died." Mm-hmm. What was it, 2 years later or 2 weeks later or whatever, his girlfriend joined him. It doesn't say on this day Jim Morrison died. It doesn't wrap it up like that. And I'm friends with a very popular 60s rock photographer who did a lot of really great photos with Jim Morrison and quite a few bands. And when I'd asked him one night, we'd been out drinking, and he said, "No, I know for a fact Jim's alive. As a matter of fact, in my collection of photos somewhere, I have a picture of him on his motorcycle in France 5 years after he died."
I tell you, it's the greatest urban legend of rock and roll. And it's still, you know, people are still looking into this. And I'm pretty close to a lot of this because I do a lot of radio shows that involve that story. And I was called by another station and to come on and talk about Jim Morrison being alive and hiding in Oregon as a cowboy. And I thought, oh, my gosh, you know. And, I mean, to me, that's perfectly something that's completely out there. I mean, I talked to the guy, no evidence of anything. But there's some strange things. I mean,
was he going all Brokeback Mountain with Elvis?
Yeah, the Brokeback Mountain.
you complete me, man.
On the island of dead rock stars who are really alive.
I can't quit you.
It's just really strange. But I'll tell you what's really strange. And this just happened a few months ago because I was doing a show with Robbie and Ray, Robbie Krieger and Ray Manzarek. Right. And one of the questions came up. And I'd worked with Ray on VH1 Confidential. And your listeners may be interested to know that when Jim Morrison died in 1971, Pamela Corson, his live-in girlfriend, didn't have enough money to buy the grave at Père Lachaise, so she leased it for 30 years, which meant that the lease was up in 2001, and with all the graffiti at Père Lachaise and the French never understanding American culture, why people would want to stand at Jim Morrison's grave instead of Chopin, I mean, you can see signs pointing to Jim, but you never saw a sign that pointed to Fred,
Right.
And anytime I go to Paris, and I go to Père Lachaise, I see at least 50 people around his grave on any day I go. So he's one of the top exhibits. I think he's next to the Eiffel Tower in Paris as far as people visiting his grave, one of the sites. And I remember Ray distinctly saying on VH1 that on July 8th, 2001, he's going to be standing there with Doors fans throughout the world, and they're going to be yelling, open the box, because he didn't believe Morrison was in there. Well, we did this show, and when the question came up to me, he said, oh, that's disgusting. Jim's dead. He's been buried. And it just hit me like right between my eyes, because I've never heard him say that. It's always no. I mean, it's not. So I was just really shocked. I know Robbie always thought he was dead, that he died, he's buried there. Robbie's answer is, well, somebody's got to be buried there. Well, that's probably true. And I know Jim's brother-in-law, Alan Graham. And Alan has this fascinating story of a German musician whose name was Dietmar that very well resembled Morrison. And when you think about Jim Morrison with an IQ of 150 and telling the Doors that he'd like to escape this whole music thing and just become a poet or a businessman, it leaves some conjecture with it. But, just the idea that, no one saw the body. Well, Pamela Corson saw the body. One of her friends who helped arrange for the burial saw it, maybe Mary Ann Faithfull, 3 people. And when the Doors manager came out, all he saw was a wooden coffin with the lid screwed in place. So no one actually saw it. But now the French government has agreed to let Jim stay. And the Morrison family pays for a security system in the grave, and they pay to have the graffiti cleared. And it looks like Jim's going to be the American in Paris who's going to be staying there for a long time now, probably forever.
But doesn't that lend to the whole conspiracy, too, that, well, we better just keep him where he is?
Yeah, well, Alan Graham told me, he said, and what would happen if they opened the grave and nobody was in it? And you got to remember that's Jim's brother-in-law.
Right.
So I really think that Jim is dead, and I think he's buried at Père Lachaise. And my own personal belief from everything I found. Last year a book came out. I was in Paris last summer, but a book came out saying that Jim had died at the Electric Circus from an overdose, and that a paramedic had came in, pronounced him dead in the bathroom
right.
of the nightclub. And then the 2 men who gave him the drugs said, no, he's not dead, and they took him to his apartment. Now, when they put him in the bathtub, what's kind of odd is his back was against the faucets. So very few people sit in a bathtub with your back against the faucet. It's very uncomfortable.
Right.
So it was like he was planted there. And if that story's true, then Pamela Corson's story has to be untrue because she wasn't there with him. And, when Pamela Corson was asked by, Danny Sugarman, if Morrison were alive, her answer was this. She said, well, if Jim were alive, he would call me. Odd, huh?
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember Ray Manzarek when Friday Night Video started in the 80s. He was like one of the first hosts of Friday Night Videos.
Right.
And I remember him just being absolutely liquored up looking and making some throwaway comment about the fact that Morrison wasn't dead. And then like a couple, week or two later on Entertainment Tonight clearing it up. And just, they kind of discounted it in like a comment that, he was just drunk and, just being reactive on the show to get people's attention.
Yeah, well, I was a little shocked because I remember I've got a copy of the DVD of him saying that. It sort of surprised me. But other than that, I mean, that's one of the great stories. So who knows? But, that's what I love about the topics is because the music will last forever, so will the stories, and they'll be known by whole new generations, and what fun people can have by going into this and listening to their music and learning something about some of the greatest artists who ever lived and get these great stories.
Well, let's talk about, on the back of the book you mentioned chilling quirks of fate surrounding the deaths of musicians in the Allman Brothers Band and Leonard Skinner. Skinner has always seemed to capture everybody's attention. We have about 3 minutes left on the show. Why don't you hit us with some of the highlights of that as well?
Oh, you want to talk about the Allman Brothers and Skinner?
Yeah, please.
Okay, the story of the Allman Brothers was really interesting, is that on October 29th, 1970, Duane Allman had a opium overdose in Nashville, Tennessee, and they rushed him to the hospital, and the doctor in the emergency room said, well, I'm sorry, he's just too far gone, he's not going to make it. And when he said that, Barry Oakley, the bassist and Duane's best friend, just went berserk, went out to the parking lot, fell on his knees, and started praying aloud and saying, God, just give him one more year, just one more year to live, please, just one more year. And after about 20 minutes, the doctor comes out, and he has this shocked look on his face, and he says, look, I don't know how to tell you this, but he's going to be okay. Well, Duane Allman recovered. The band continued, but on October 29th, 1971, 1 year to the date of the drug overdose, Duane Allman was killed in a motorcycle accident in Macon, Georgia.
Wow.
1 year and 13 days later, Barry Oakley was killed 200 feet from the same space in a motorcycle accident as well. So both of them were dead at the age of 24. With Leonard Skinner, they'd had bad vibes about the plane they were flying, and a lot of the members in the band were actually thinking about flying commercial. And Cassie Gaines, who was going to be killed in the plane crash, the day they left to fly to Louisiana for the next show, she told Ronnie Van Zant, she says, look, I'm afraid of this plane. I just want to ride in the equipment truck with the roadies. Just let me ride with them. And he put his arm around her and said, Cassie, honey, when your time's up, it's up, no matter where you are. So she got on the plane. But as she was getting on the plane, the other backup honkette, Joe Billingsley, who was in Arkansas, called Alan Collins. And she said, Alan, I just had this terrible dream. And I dreamed the plane crash. Please don't fly on that plane. Please just, fly commercial. But the band did fly the plane. And when it crashed, of course, Ronnie Van Zant was killed. Steve Gaines, Cassie Gaines, Dean Kilpatrick, who was their road manager, was killed as well. The rest of the band was injured. The Street Survivor album came out 3 days with the flames over Steve Gaines and Ronnie Van Zant, and they had to pull it on a black album. But the day the plane left, Leonard Skinner had fired two of the roadies for running up a bill in their hotels. And I think one of the roadies, I think it was Chuck Flowers, was given a gun. Ronnie Van Zant had given him a gun. And after the plane crash, he kills himself with the gun that Van Zant gave him. One of the other roadies had a tragic death. When Alan Collins got back to Jacksonville, his wife, Kathy, died from a miscarriage. And it seems like their whole life was, at the end, or Alan Collins' life was exactly like the story That Smell, about, oak trees, you're in my way. He had a car crash. His girlfriend was killed. He was a paraplegic. I mean, the whole thing was terrible. So sometimes there's a great streak of bad luck. And that's what happened with Leonard Skinner, the great story there, and the Allman Brothers. But I'll tell you, the next time I come and do your show, we'll talk about some of the great paranormal things that's not in the book, some of my new stuff that I haven't told anyone.
Great. I'd love to cover that with you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Mr. Patterson. Your stories are great. I do recommend everybody pick up the books. The Walrus Was Paul, and Take a Walk on the Dark Side, Rock and Roll's Myth, Legends, and Curses. Tell your friends about the show. It's going to be up and on archives at ktlkfm.com. So if they missed it, they can hear it tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us here in the darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. We'll be back again tomorrow with a brand new show. I hope that you'll join us 9 p.m. Central Time, right on the button. You can join us here on 100.3 FM K-Talk.